Okay, our vendors.
All right, we're going to jump back into it.
Okay, so the next on my list is Julie and Richard Pace. Thank you. Dana and Andrew Jacob.
Okay, hello. I'm just curious about last time you had mentioned that the HOA would be responsible for the financial upkeep of whatever is left from the historical property, like the buildings on there. What happens if they decide, how does it work if they say, no, we don't want to maintain the finances to keep the building in a historical status? I'm just very unaware of like what would happen if the HOA came in and said, no, we don't want to pay for that. Yes.
I mean, this is more of a legal question.
Yeah.
So I'll
Yeah.
answer the question. So, any purchaser of the property is going to take title to it subject to a declaration of restrictions and covenants, which is the HOA declaration. It sets up the community, and in there it would have this particular structure in the open space. Just like the rest of the open space, the HOA would then be required to maintain this structure. If they decided in the future for something like 20, fast forward 20 years and they said, we don't want to do this anymore, they would need to do two things. One, they as a group would need to be unified, because you cannot amend your HOA declaration without a certain percentage of the homeowners agreeing to it. And the second part of that is they would have to come back to this board and seek a new approval to demolish the resource if they didn't want to do it. A third thing would be, typically there's a concept of demolition by neglect. So if they just weren't keeping it up, and if this board, approved this particular project, there would be conditions of approval, as well as they would have enforcement rights in the HOA and under their own ordinance to enforce the HOA's maintenance of that structure.
Okay. All right. That clears it up. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Do I need to use a microphone?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great. Mirka Walczak. That's Walczak. Is that right? Okay. Ellen and Stanley Berry. Not here. Jameson Glennon. I don't believe he's here either, correct? Mary or Mark Donovan.
I am familiar. Yeah. Yeah. So I just have a really quick question. Can you clarify, did you say that the barn would be part of the open space?
Correct.
Under the ordinance, the common open space is something that's supposed to be substantially free of structures, but may contain such improvements as are appropriate for the recreation of residents served thereby. Is it really appropriate to call it part of the open space if you don't know how the structure will be used, and that perhaps that's something that should be considered during the land development?
I believe that in the ordinance does state that you could place it in the open space, if I'm not mistaken.
When you say place it, you mean
An historic resource.
generally a historic resource?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Do you know if it matters how the building will be used, or if it's just historic resource? I don't have that.
I don't think so.
right
I
off
think,
the bat.
whether it's an amenity or it's a feature, like it would still be a public amenity and not a lot specific that's owned by, a particular owner.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying.
Abigail Freed.
Hi, I just have one quick question. So has it ever, because I know the HOA concern is that, the residents won't want to upkeep it. It might impact your sales negatively. Has it ever happened where a piece of the land is donated to the township? Like that way it takes off the burden from the residents, and then the township could then maintain, and I'm not saying the township wants to do this, but I'm just curious, could the township in theory maintain this property as like a township resource?
They would have to accept it for dedication.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Lachelle and Kevin Wilfong.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick clarification. These structures, how close are they to the existing homeowners' properties? And how close are they to the proposed properties? We're talking open space. Is it like right there outside of the shot? How close is this in proximity to existing and proposed development?
Proposed, it's difficult to say. I would say, maybe to the right of it would probably be about 50 feet. To the existing homeowners, I would need to pull up a site plan, and I think it's pretty far from existing homeowners, but I couldn't say definitively of how far it is without the site plan.
Thank you. I would like to know that eventually.
Okay.
Amanda and Brad Gemsener.
Gensimer, yeah.
Hi, Amanda Gensimer. So my question is, so we're talking about your proposal is to remove the more updated parts of the barn and leave the historic parts of the barn. So I'm wondering why that's not being considered for the house as well. I understand there's a really interesting like stone fireplace in the house, as well as a spiral staircase that sounds pretty interesting. Like it might be worth saving.
After our assessment of the historical, the tenant house that's to the left of this picture, the house has kind of been added onto extensively, more so than the barn. They are, in fact, almost two different structures of the barn, whereas on the tenant house, they've been incorporated as one structure, but they're broken up into different quarters, I would say. And so, with the Historical Commission's also recommendation to remove the tenant house and keep the barn, that's what we are proceeding with.
I was just wondering, I went to the Historic Commission meeting last month just to ask them about it, to see what, because they had done a tour and I haven't seen it. So it did sound like they thought there was, some interesting parts that could be saved. It just may be more difficult, I guess, cumbersome for you as a developer to manage. Is that part of your decision making?
Well, I think, the tenant house, like we want to keep a historic, this is a class 2 historic prop resource. What was, important in the eyes of, the Historical Commission was keeping the barn. Whereas the tenant house, because of, like I said, the additions, it was difficult to ascertain a structure that was still in place and architecturally significant within the community.
Thank you.
Frank or Diane Donatelli. Stephanie or Sean Quigley. Rahima Mavic. Is she not here tonight? No? Okay. Michael or Mileva Rapaski. Also not here? Okay. And it's Mileva, Mileva. Fred Connor. Not present. And last but not least, Barry or Catherine Molzette. Also not here. Okay. Do the board members have any questions for this witness?
Yeah, looking at the map, actually where you're saying the barn off to the left down is the old spring house, cemetery, and fireplace. Included in saving the barn, just wanted to confirm they're all also going to be preserved.
Correct.
Okay, that's it for me.
Hi, Have you investigated the cost associated with removing the wall?
Removing which wall?
The exterior wall around the barn?
No, not the. We haven't gotten a cost estimate just based on that yet.
And similar question, have you investigated the cost of remediating and restoring the wall?
No, not on the wall. No.
Okay. And you have not engaged anyone to evaluate the historical significance of the wall?
Yes, we have a witness.
You do? Okay. Yeah. Specifically about the wall?
It will be about.
Okay.
Wouldn't this conditional use move forward into, permanency with the property?
So,
and that might be a
no, and this may be a fair question for the land, the land development aspect of this later on that proceed. But I think the questions that we've been seeing from the residents have been related to how do we ensure that the long-term owners of this property will maintain these structures in their historically significant condition rather than allowing them to deteriorate through neglect. I am aware that preservation easements are one way where landowners can enter into agreements with historical organizations and basically have a mechanism where someone holds that easement or that covenant and can enforce it to ensure that the historical structures are maintained. The developer will be in charge of the HOA at the outset of the development. So I'm asking whether that is something that you have considered.
Not just yet. I think what we have considered is, within the HOA documents, incorporating the, normal things like a reserve, having this be on one of the reservations for the HOA that's collected monthly so that they have the funds to maintain the historic resource.
Right. Would you be willing to consider putting a preservation easement on the barn and other historic structures on the property?
So, yeah.
No other.
If I may, the township could also be the holder of the.
That was one of my thoughts. Thank you.
I just had one quick follow-up, which is for the exterior wall that will be removed, have you had an assessment done as to whether that's structural in any way or serves as a retaining wall?
Yes.
Okay. I assume that you looked at the person to your...
He's my structural.
Okay, so he'll speak to that next. Okay, that's all the questions I have.
I have one more. And looking at your concept plan, it looks like right now the barn straddles the line between lots 28 and 29, and the walled area is what you show as your stormwater base. I'm assuming all that's to be addressed if you were to save the barn.
Yeah, we would. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The stormwater that you're seeing there is it is preliminary. We have done testing, but that was one of the areas. But this, depending on the outcome of this, we'll be moving things around. So again, that's a sketch plan, not a fully engineered.
Okay, that's it for me.
Okay. Any redirect by the applicant's counsel?
No.
Okay.
Make it easier. Sam, if you want to come up here. I'd like to call my next witness, Sam Pickard.
I do.
Sam, could you state your name and business address for the record, please?
So my name is Samuel A. Pickard, Pickard, and my business address is 625 West Ridge Pike, Suite E as in Edward, 100, Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, 19428.
Where are you employed and what is your title with your employer or your position?
I'm employed with AECOM and my title is Preservation Planner.
Could you briefly describe your educational background and professional experience for the board?
Yes, I have a BA in history from LaSalle University, a certificate in preservation planning from Bucks County Community College, and a master's in city and regional planning from Temple University. And I've worked at AECOM, a predecessor company, for a little over 12 years in the cultural resource management field, and that entails everything from researching and writing property and contextual histories to conducting architectural history field survey, making National Register of Historic Places eligibility recommendations, and assessing effects of projects on historic resources.
And we do have Mr. Pickard's CV marked as Exhibit A12. And also, I'd like to ask you one more question about your qualifications. Do your professional qualifications and experience meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards for history and architectural history as set forth in 36 Code of Federal Regulation 61?
They do.
I'd like to offer Mr. Pickard as an expert in architectural history and preservation planning.
Mr. Gill, do you have any questions? No. Do any of the other parties have any questions just as to his background or qualifications? Okay, seeing none. The board? Okay, so you're so recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Pickard, are you familiar with the subject property and its features, the applicant's proposal and the surrounding area?
I am.
And were you responsible for the preparation of what we marked at the last hearing as Exhibit A6, a historic resource impact study dated January 16th, 2026?
Yes.
Was an earlier version of this study dated December 2nd, 2025, submitted with the applicant's conditional use application?
It was.
And why did you update the study?
So after the initial historical commission hearing, we revisited the site to kind of clarify some questions, particularly what the potential building materials of some of the sections of the house were, and to open up what we thought might be a sealed entryway, and it turned out to be a sealed entryway about halfway up the stairs between the first and second floor. And it just terminates in basically the back of a drywall, but we discovered that there was at one point a passage there.
So as a result of that, you felt that you should update the study before presenting to the board?
Yes.
So I'd like you to walk through the findings that you describe in the historic resource study. And I'd like to start with the tenant house. Could you explain the history of the use of this property for agricultural use and the buildings, and when you believe the first portion of the tenant house was built?
Yes. So to just give a really brief overview of this, this property was part of lands that had been set aside by the Penn family. They had a number of these manors around at least the southeastern portion of the state. And then it gets sold out of the Penn family in 1731. And eventually in the 1730s, it's subdivided. And by the time you get to about 1772, when it's sold to a man named Matthias Tyson. He runs into some issues with debts, and the sheriff is going to sell his property in 1774. And that's where we get the first mention of of details about a dwelling on the property. And so the advertisement for the sheriff's sale notes it was then 211 acres. And it says that there was a log house and a barn on the property. And then in 1799, the property's passed into some other hands. It's actually a company owns it at the time. And tax assessments usually will just say, oh, there's a dwelling or a barn. In 1799, it's notable because it notes that it's a log dwelling and a log stable. It's probably the same as the log barn. And so it's really not until the early 19th century that we find evidence for the tenant house as it exists today, a stone house. There's a advertisement placed for the property's sale in 1840, which is the first actual mention of what we believe is the stone tenant house. But it's likely that based on style and such, it probably was built a little earlier than that, maybe around 1800.
And you've been referring to this as the tenant house. Is there a main farmhouse dwelling that would have been associated with the tenant house and the barn?
Yes. So this property once was a little bit larger, but in the early 19th century, it was about 50 acres. And that acreage included up to Valley Forge Road and the property now at 1497 Valley Forge Road. And there is a 2.5-story stone farmhouse there that's another historic resource in the township. But that was historically the main house on this property. And then this served as a tenant house through the 19th into the 20th century.
And did your investigation reveal this tenant house has undergone several renovations over the years?
Yes.
And in order to walk through the board with those various changes and the sections, have you prepared an illustration, which is on page 12 of the Historic Resource Impact Study, but that we also have labeled as Exhibit A13, which is a floor plan, as well as photographs of the tenant house exterior with sections labeled, marked as Exhibit A14.
Yes.
And if you could walk through, starting with Exhibit A13, the floor plan, what you determined about the history of the tenant house.
Sure. So this is in some ways overly simplified floor plan, but it really shows that there's kind of 4 distinct blocks of the house. The oldest is what is on here as Block A, and that is depending on how you're measuring it, 2.5-story or potentially 3-story, 3.5-story building made of stone. And then to its north is an addition from probably about the 1940s, and that's B and then C. And then there is an even later addition, D, dating to about the 1950s. And so Block A the present front of the property is on the west elevation, and so it's about 3 bays wide, so it has a centered doorway on the first floor with a window on each side, and then the second and third floors both have 2 windows. And there is a basement level where it is accessed through a separate entry on the south elevation.
So based on that, so even though there are multiple stories, what you're saying is that it is chopped up and you can't access the basement from the other parts of the structure.
Yes, at present, the house is divided into 2. I'll call them apartments. So there is the first apartment is the first floor of A, first, second, and third floor of A, and then along with both the first and second floors of B and C. And then the second apartment is what we're calling the basement level of A, along with D. So you can't get from the first floor of A into the basement of A. Historically, that was possible. There was a staircase that would have gone down, but at the moment, no.
And you also looked at sections B through D and when you believe they were constructed, if you could expand a little more on that. And it may make sense to also reference Exhibit A14, which is the photograph, so that to put it in context, since the board has seen the floor plan.
So I briefly described A, and so we can see that there's 2 porches on A. One is on the basement level, one's on the west elevation, which is kind of the primary elevation of the one apartment. And they both have shed roofs supported by 3 wood posts. And then you can see in the photo here, there is section C, and that is, again, probably 1930s, maybe 1940s addition to the property or to the house. And on the obscured by Block A here is section B, which is also dates to about the same time. It's concrete masonry construction. And so you can see portion of C right there abutting A. And then on the east side of A, there may have historically been another wing of the house, maybe another older dwelling. We're not entirely certain. There is that passageway I had mentioned in the winder staircase between the first and the second stories, there's one step down and then it abruptly terminates in what is now the back of a wall, interior wall of Section D, which was built in the 1950s.
And then did you also investigate the barn structure that is on the property?
Yes.
And can you describe the barn structure as it appears today? We do have marked as Exhibit A16 photos 36 through 41 of your report, which are also in pages 31 through 33. If you could walk the board, what you examined related to the barn.
Yes. So the barn is a stone bank barn built at least the core of it was built in 1834 by James and Frances Coffey, who owned the property at the time. And so there's the initials on the date stone, and then James Coffey died in 1837, and his estate was selling the property in 1840, and they made sure to note that there's a new barn on the property. And so it's the core of it, which is not really visible from this picture, but it is a stone. Yeah, you can see a little bit more of it there. It's a stone barn. While the Coffeys were likely of English descent, and this has some aspects of Lake District barn, English Lake District barn, which is a type of bank barn that is found in Pennsylvania. We ended up, just for the typology and its form, saying it's probably a variation of, there's two types of classification schemes. There's a type J in Charles Dornbush's classification scheme, or it's a class 2 type A in Robert Ensminger's classification scheme of Pennsylvania barns. It's kind of getting into the nitty-gritty details there. In short, it's a bank barn with the core made of stone. And by a bank barn, that is a barn that is typically built into a hillside. And so it is either into a hillside or they've banked up earth on the other side to create a ramp to an upper level. And so you'll have essentially a 2-story barn on one side and a 1-story barn on the other. And so there's that core, and then what you have is a 3-bay wide 4-bay extension, and that's what we see there. There's a walled barnyard, and then there's this 4-bay extended 4-bay that may be original. It may be a relatively early addition. The first documentation we have of it is from about 1890, but there's a good chance that this would have been built prior to that. It's common for Pennsylvania bank barns. And this has been extensively modified, but you can still see there's a barn door on the second floor there. And this would have been used for straw or hay storage. And then on the lower level, it would have been entry to stabling for animals. So the core of the barn, including this 4-bay, is broken up at the moment into almost 4 sections. There's the top level has the extended 4-bay, and then there is a threshing floor toward the back of the barn. And then the bottom level has kind of the under-bay, and then a stabling area for animals in what might be the basement of the barn.
Did you evaluate actually before we move on, there was one other structure on the property that was mentioned, which we aren't spending time on because Mr. Carpino indicated that it would be saved, but is there also a spring house on this property?
There's the ruins of a spring house. It's a stone foundation there's no door or roof or anything. It's just basically 4 stone walls with plants growing through them, but yes.
And a cemetery was mentioned earlier. Is that, based on your research, is that cemetery historic?
No, it was used from 1988 till about 2013.
when you say used.
Used for burials. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yes.
It is still in use as a cemetery, but
Yes.
actively used for burials
Okay.
between 1988 and 2013.
Thank you. Did you evaluate the historic significance of the tenant house and barn against the criteria established for the evaluation of eligibility for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, as well as the registration requirements established in the Historic Agricultural Resources of Pennsylvania, circa 1700 to 1960, Southeastern Pennsylvania Historic Agricultural Region, circa 1750 to 1960 requirements?
Yes.
And based on your evaluation, what did you determine?
We determined that the property, we would recommend that it is not eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
And I'll have you walk through some of that criteria. But first, did you also review the Schuylkill Township Historic Properties Map and the Schuylkill Township Historic Resource Survey dated March 2010 applicable to the property, which is attached to the Historical Commission's recommendation, which we have marked as Exhibit A5?
Yes.
And is the property classified as a historic resource on that map and survey?
Yes, it is classified as a Class 2 resource in Schuylkill Township. It is number 63.
And what is, generally speaking, high level, what is the difference between a Class 1 historic resource and a Class 2 historic resource as defined in Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance?
So a Class 1 resource is basically a resource that is listed in or is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, whether that's as a individual resource or as a contributing resource to, say, a larger historic district. Whereas a Class 2 is a historic resource that the township has recognized as a historic resource, have decided that it is significant to the township's history, but it does not meet those criteria for a Class 1.
And according to the 2010 survey, why was this property classified as a Class 2 historic resource?
So the survey done in 2010 classified this as Class 2, in part due to loss of integrity of the house and barn, and the lack of this being used as an agricultural area. But it was basically because it determined that the house was old.
And based on your research, you've touched on this, is the first reference to the tenant house that you could locate later than the initial 1700s log house that was referenced?
Yes. So it was initially, I believed that this house may have been built as early as 1731. There's a concrete, mid-20th century concrete stone on the property that says In-Hole Farm 1731. But it seems likely from the tax records, newspaper advertisements, that this house was actually built probably in the early 19th century.
And you referenced earlier that you do not believe, nor did the survey recommend that this be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Did you take a look at the criteria for historic resources as well as complete an integrity assessment for the resource?
Yes.
Specifically, starting with an integrity assessment, if you could walk the board through what that means and what your findings were.
So for something to be eligible for listing in the National Register, it has to be found to be significant under, there's 4 categories of significance, but it also needs to have enough integrity to convey that significance. And so there are 7 aspects of integrity that are looked at. And typically a property doesn't need to have all 7. And depending on what it's significant for, it can kind of vary in how much integrity it needs. But so when we assess it, there's integrity of location, which basically means is this where it was historically located? And it can also mean, does it have at least some of the historic land associated with it, especially for an agricultural property? And yes, these are where they were. There is still good chunk of remaining land. Then next up is typically setting. And does this have the setting that might convey its significance? And so it's no longer in use as an agricultural property. It's overgrown. And then it's also surrounded by, instead of, the agricultural fields that you might see in different areas of the state, there's the mid-20th century homes on Flintlock Lane. There's other 20th century homes on the other side of Valley Forge Road. There are, even on this property, late 20th century institutional buildings, and there's further institutional buildings in 20th century development to the south. And so overall, the integrity of setting has been compromised. So we would judge that, no, this really doesn't have much integrity of setting. There's integrity. The next three categories are usually grouped together as kind of design, workmanship, and materials. And design and materials more or less speak for themselves. What was the historic design and what were the historic materials? And then workmanship is, can you see evidence of really the labor and the craft that went into a historic building? And this is something where, are there aspects of this that are definitely there in the house? Yes, there's that beautiful winding box staircase. And with the barn, you can see some of these timbers that you can tell are hand hewn. There's bark on some of them. But overall, especially for the house, its design is completely compromised. It's been broken up into two apartments. Exterior walls have been punched through. From the exterior, the average person might not necessarily look at this and say, "Oh, this is an old house." It has windows have been replaced. The porches are somewhat historic, but they don't really convey the view that one might have had of the house. And there's really not a lot of materials that might be associated with a early 19th century house readily visible. And on the barn, there is a little bit more integrity, though the forebay has been altered on the exterior, alteration, with the covering with, I think it's asbestos shingles there. And then there's, especially on the west side, there's two additions, one of which may be potentially historic as part of an attached wagon house. We're not entirely certain. It has a stone foundation, but it's been almost entirely altered. It's covered in vinyl. It's been converted into, on the bottom floor, it looked like kind of office utility space. Upstairs was a multi-room apartment. And so in that level, the integrity of the barn has been significantly impacted. And then there's integrity of feeling and association. And these can kind of be a little bit looser in some senses, but it's really, we found that it's no longer, people would not see this necessarily and associate this as a historic farm in and of itself, due to the changes to these buildings, the lack of other agricultural outbuildings, fields, livestock, and changes to the setting overall.
And then you mentioned there are several criteria for a designation. Did you also evaluate the property with respect to the criterion, each of the criteria?
Yes.
And if we want to start with criterion A, if you want to touch on what that is and what you looked at here.
Sure. So as I'd said, to be considered eligible for listing, a property needs to be significant under 4 criteria. Criterion A, to begin with, is summed up as, is it related to an event that is important in national, state, or local history? And so an example of that might be a battlefield as a singular event, or in a case of an agricultural property, can this help tell the story of this region of Pennsylvania's agriculture through what is present here? Through the buildings that have survived, and can people learn more about the history of that through that? And so we found that we assessed it. Pennsylvania has actually a pretty rigorous agricultural a way to analyze agricultural properties for eligibility, and they've broken the state up into different regions, and they have different criteria, even based on for this time period, and in all of the time periods, this property does not meet it for the agricultural standards. Typically they would have to have many more outbuildings related to agricultural production or different, livestock, animals, so on and so forth. This does not have those, and we weren't able to link it to any specific event. So we found it not significant under criterion A.
Next, turning to criterion B, what was your analysis with respect to that?
So criterion B is a property linked to an important person in history, and typically it has to be linked to them in a way that's significant for what they're known for. So it's just because someone did something and they happen to be born in this house, and their family moved away 3 years later. That doesn't mean that house is significant. Does this contribute to understanding a person's life and work? And we weren't able to identify any such person's significance related to this property.
And next, turning to criterion C.
So criterion C it's a little broader, but it could be summed up in a lot of ways as architecture and maybe engineering. So it's does the property embody distinctive characteristics of type, period, or method of construction? And does it represent the work of a master, have a high artistic value? And so it's something like Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water in Western Pennsylvania might fall under this, or the Brooklyn Bridge for engineering. And so in Pennsylvania, they do, as well, I said, they have these agricultural standards. A farm must possess physical characteristics that relate to its cultural, aesthetic, craftsmanship, or production values related to the region it's located in. And typically, just because it has those is not good enough. It has to be a rare or intact example of a period of type to be eligible as a farm under criterion C, or like a particularly noteworthy example. And because the tenant house has been so altered, it doesn't retain the massing, it doesn't retain the exterior materials or style consistent with its initial construction, or even if it had been, say, renovated later into like Gothic revival, it doesn't have that to it. It really doesn't communicate any consistent style. And then likewise, the barn has undergone substantial renovations, not as much as the house, but it has the additions on the west elevation have been greatly altered even since potentially they were built. And there have been alterations to the forebay on the south elevation of the barn. And so really at the moment, we assess that neither possesses high artistic value, nor are particularly distinguished as the work of master craftsmen.
And then finally, how did you measure the property against criterion D?
So criterion D, often people just lump it in as archaeology, which it can cover archaeological sites, but it's really is a property able to yield, or is it likely to yield, important information about history. And in the context of a building, that can be like, are we going to learn something about that we didn't already know or aren't likely to know about how these buildings were constructed, and particular construction techniques. And we really didn't think that there was anything that is out of the norm for these. So we assessed that it wouldn't be eligible under D.
Does the Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance provide any similar guidance for judging the significance of historic resources?
No, there's no locally specific criteria.
And as you're aware and has been touched on, you're aware the applicant is seeking conditional use approval for demolition of the tenant house only. And more modern additions of the barn structure. Are you familiar with the standards for demolition of historic resources in the Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance that are outlined in Article 9 of the zoning ordinance?
Yes.
And to the extent applicable, does your report include the information requested under zoning ordinance section 370-55 capital B1?
To the best of my knowledge.
Does your report also contain the information required by section 370-55B3 of the zoning ordinance?
To the best of my knowledge.
And under that particular section, that second section that I referenced, were you required to also consider the effect of the demolition on historic significance or architectural integrity of neighboring historic properties or the historic character of the neighborhood or community?
Yes.
And are there historic properties or structures as identified on Schuylkill Township's historic resource inventory within the proximity of the property?
Yes.
It's up to you because I don't want to have people flip around, but Exhibit A4 is the aerial, which would put this in context. If you could identify the properties that are in the proximity.
So there are, it would be resources 64 at 1497 Valley Forge Road, which, so I guess right to the left on this, to the there is resource 65, which is 2 McKinney Lane, which is I guess southwest. There's resource 66, which is 1571 Valley Forge Road, which is also southwest, I'll say. And then there are resources 70 and 71 at 1601 Valley Forge Road, and that's to the south.
And can the tenant house or the barn structure be seen from any of those historic resources today?
To the best of my knowledge, no. They're obscured by either other buildings, such as the modern buildings on the property, or trees, or in some cases, topography.
And even with redevelopment of the property, would it be likely that they would not be seen, assuming adequate buffering and landscaping?
Yes.
In your opinion, then, would the demolition of the tenant house structure have any adverse impact on the historic significance or architectural integrity of the neighboring historic resources?
No.
Are you also familiar with the criteria for deliberation for demolition of a historic resource outlined in section 370-55F?
Yes.
And with respect to those criteria, do you believe they weigh in favor of allowing for demolition of the tenant house?
Objection. That seems to be beyond the scope of the witness's expertise.
Understood. In your opinion, as a planner, with especially in historic preservation, does the applicant's proposal properly consider the historic significance of the property's historic resources, in your opinion?
I would say yes, it does. With the revised proposal, considering saving and preserving the historic core of the barn, it preserves a historic resource in the township and really pays tribute to the history of this property as an agricultural property.
And did you weigh the various factors in favor and against demolition in coming up with your assessment and the opinions you gave this evening?
Yes, the relevant factors were weighed, and they're on, I believe, page 6 of the report, and in chapter 7, which begins on page 72.
And one final question, even with, if this board were to approve demolition of the tenant house, did you also make some recommendations with regard to mitigation measures that could be provided?
Yes.
And are those something that you understand the applicant would be willing to comply with?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Before we get to Mr. Gill, Carrie, you okay? Okay, Mr. Gill?
All right.
Do you want the
All right, just a few questions here. You just spent a significant amount of, you just spent a significant amount of your direct examination detailing the criteria for listing of properties on the National Register of Historic Places, correct?
I believe so, yes.
All right. Now, the Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance does not require that a property be listed on the National Register of Historic Places in order to be historically significant, correct?
So to be a Class 2 property, it does not.
All right. So the fact that the property is not listed on the National Register or is not eligible, in your opinion, for listing on the National Register doesn't have an impact on, again, on the locally historically significant nature of the resource, correct?
The township has previously determined that it was historic, and so that's that.
All right. And to that point, the layout of the tenant house that you described during your testimony, to your knowledge, was that the layout of the tenant house in 2010 when the resource inventory was created, or at least updated?
To the best of my knowledge.
Okay. So the township classified, and do you understand that it was actually designated locally historically significant prior to 2010?
As I do seem to understand it, yes.
Okay. So the township then was aware of the layout and the orientation of the tenant house at the time that the township...
How would he be able to testify as to what the
Fair
township
enough.
was aware of?
Fair enough. I'll withdraw that question. All right. You testified that the historic resource impact study that you prepared includes all of the information that's required by the Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance, correct?
To the best of my ability, yes.
I'm sorry, to the best of your ability?
I said knowledge at the time, but yeah, it included to the best of my ability.
Okay, what do you see as the difference between knowledge and ability?
Everything that I could put in, I put in. And that was, and to the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay, the ordinance requires an analysis of the costs to renovate an historic resource as part of the consideration for demolition of that resource, correct?
I believe so.
Does the historic resource impact study include any analysis of costs to renovate the tenant house?
We were not provided with any analysis, no.
Okay. Did you ask your client for any such analysis to include in the HRIS?
We included all we were provided from the client.
Okay. Is that a no?
No. No. We asked for material relating to everything that is listed in the ordinance, and we provided what we were given.
Okay. So again, so your client, you asked your client to provide you with information regarding the cost to renovate, rehabilitate the tenant house, but your client did not provide that information to you. Is that correct?
That could be correct.
Okay. The tenant house was in active, productive use as a rental dwellings as recently as the summer of 2025, correct?
So I've been told.
Okay. And who told you that?
I believe it was mentioned in previous hearings, either in front of here or the historical commission.
Okay. It's not your testimony, is it, that the tenant house is structurally unsound, is it?
I have a different witness that will answer about structure.
I'm just asking him his testimony.
I have no expertise in structural soundness of a building.
Okay. So you're not here to tell this board your opinion as an architectural historian that the tenant house could not continue to be used for rental dwellings, correct?
Not my expertise, no.
Okay. The Historic Resource Impact Study makes reference to hazardous substances, correct?
Yes.
And specifically with regard to the tenant house, you aver in the Historic Resource Impact Study that the tenant house has, quote, hazardous substances in it, correct?
Yes.
What are those hazardous substances?
I am not aware.
Did you not write the historic resource impact study?
So we wrote the historic resource impact study, and we included information provided to us by our client.
Okay. So did you take any steps to confirm or refute that there are or are not hazardous substances in the historic structures?
I do not have the expertise to make or confirm or refute that.
Okay. So you don't know what the hazardous substances that you refer to in the HRIS, you don't know what those hazardous substances are?
I do not.
Okay. The Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance also requires, as part of the submission of materials to justify demolition of an historic resource, that an analysis be done of adaptive reuses. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
You're familiar with that requirement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And in the HRIS, in your analysis of adaptive reuses, you suggest that, and I believe, I'll get us the exact page number here if you'll bear with me for a second. Sorry. There we go. If you'll turn your attention to page number 72 of the Historic Resource Impact Study. You have it there?
I do.
And on page 72 and 73, there's a table where you analyze the information that's required under the ordinance and where in the HRIS it can be found, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, would you please turn your attention to page 73, the second page of that table. And the fourth line in the table up from the bottom, where it references section 55B3E of the ordinance.
Yes.
And it asks you to analyze adaptive use opportunities for the historic resources, correct?
Yes.
And you say see section 7.1.6.
That is a typo, I believe.
Okay, so there is no section 7.1.6, correct?
No, there is 7.1.5 adaptive use constraints.
Okay. Now, what analysis did you do to determine that there are no adaptive use opportunities for the historic, for the tenant house?
So we presented the information provided to us by our client.
Okay. So again, as the author of this report, you did not take any steps to analyze adaptive use opportunities, correct?
No, that is not my expertise.
Okay. I'd like to stay on the tenant house for just a moment. Bear with me. The floor plan that you laid out with the 4 separate blocks of the tenant house, Block A, Block B, Block C, and Block D. It's your testimony that Blocks B, C, and D are 20th century additions, correct?
Yes, that is to the best of our understanding.
Is that?
I do not have any documentary proof that they were not there, but yes, they are built out of concrete block, and that would not have been available before the 20th century. So
Okay,
yes.
fair enough. So Block A is the core of the tenant house, correct?
If you want to call it historic core, yes.
All right. Is there any reason why Blocks B, C, and D cannot be removed and Block A retained as the historic core?
From what standpoint?
From the standpoint of your expertise as an architectural historian?
I don't see how I have any expertise relating to the demolition of those wings. I'm not sure what your question's getting at.
Well, I'm asking you, from your perspective, in your opinion, is there any reason why the applicant couldn't remove the 20th century additions and leave in place, the 19th century core structure?
Depending on the structural issues, I don't know if there is an issue why they could or could not.
Okay. When you say depending upon the structural issues, what structural issues would be relevant for that analysis?
Again, I do have a
But the structural engineer, as I understand, is going to testify as to the current condition of the property, not prospective as to what could or could not be done with the structure, right?
sure, I guess we can have the answer.
But the witness,
I would.
If you could rephrase the question.
but the witness testified it depends on the structural issues, and I'm probing that statement.
I'm going to say it's speculation on my part.
Okay.
So as long as that's accepted, there's potentially, if there are structural tie-ins, beams, needs to remediate portions of this or fix openings in walls, restore that. So I presume that it could be done with the proper engineering, proper funding, proper workers and skills.
And again, you're not aware of any cost analysis that's been done by your client to analyze the economic feasibility of that work, correct?
I have not been presented with any now.
Okay. The resources, the other historic resources that are within the vicinity of 1485 Valley Forge Road. You testified about, obviously, 1497 Valley Forge Road, and then you testified that there are how many other resources did you refer to?
70 and 71 are grouped together, but it would be 4.
Okay, so there are 4 historic resources within the vicinity of this resource, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does the fact that there's been interceding or that there's been development between an historic resource in one location and an historic resource in another location, that you're not suggesting that that leads to a conclusion that one of those resources should be demolished, correct?
No.
Okay. In that same vein, the fact that an historic resource has lost some of its integrity is not a basis to demolish that resource in and of itself, correct?
I would say that demolition is in some ways, not even in some ways, demolition is separate from the idea of a property having lost integrity. So I would say, no, like, loss of integrity doesn't mean, oh, no, we have to demolish the property.
Okay, so your testimony that the tenant house has lost some of its integrity, again, I want to be clear, you're not suggesting that that is a basis upon which this board should approve the demolition of the tenant house, correct?
I think that if the board is determining, if the board and like the historical commission are looking at how a resource, what the significance and in this case, integrity of a resource is, which helps actually determine what level and classification of a historic resource they are in the township. I think those are relevant criteria to determining, to the analysis at least, of whether or not the demolition of a historic resource should be allowed.
All right. To that point, however, the fact that the tenant house has lost some of its integrity, let's assume that's a given, that the tenant house has lost some of its integrity. To your knowledge, no one has filed an application with the Historical Commission or with this board seeking to remove the tenant house from the township's inventory, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
All right. Those are all the questions I have on cross.
Thank you. Now turning to the neighboring witnesses, Keith and Tammy Wickstrom.
You had testified that you cannot see the tenant house or the barn from the public roads. In fact, Mr. Carpino did it at the last meeting. I would actually like to share a picture. I ride past there several times a week on my bicycle.
If I could object.
I get stuck in traffic there. Excuse me one second.
For him presenting evidence, it would just be asking a question that I don't.
So are you presenting that photograph to show to the witness?
I want to show the witness, yes.
Okay, I think you can do that. You can properly mark it as Wickstrom 1. You'll need to provide copies for everybody, but.
I took this photograph over 23 at the entrance. What do you see in the middle of that photograph?
I see the forebay of the barn.
And what else do you see there?
I see the forebay of the barn. I see what appears to be the bay window of the 1950s edition, and a portion of the porch of Section A.
Good. Yeah, that's correct. I can leave this if you want for
You'll
exhibits.
actually need to leave it, yeah, because we'll mark that as Exhibit Wickstrom 1. If you leave it up there, that'd be great.
Now I have one question, and it's because I'm going to come back with the engineer when the engineer is testifying. If it is possible to excise sections B, C, and D from the tenant house, do you believe, with your expertise, that the property would be more valuable historically that way?
So by valuable historically, do you mean would it have better integrity or significance?
Yeah, when you think about a farm, I sort of grew up on a farm. My uncle had a farm. The farm was nothing without the farmhouse. You have a barn without a farmhouse, you don't have a farm. So they're kind of like peanut butter and jelly go together. The tenant house and the barn go together. Do you believe that if the more recent iterations that are not necessarily historic in nature can be taken away from there, taken off site, do you believe that that would become a more valuable resource to not only the township, but, to the residents?
It would a little bit of speculation here would depend on how it's done and all. I still would argue that based on, because Schuylkill Township just declared this historic, there's no criteria as to why. Basically, the survey form basically said it's an old house. As for the National Register of Historic Places criteria, it still would not be significant under A, B, C, or D.
Understandable. But to Schuylkill Township?
To Schuylkill Township, I think it's what are the subjective views of the township. Like, if the township decides that that's historic, that's up to the township.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Tammy Wickstrom. Mark or Wendy Harville. I'm sorry. Oh, they're not here? I'm sorry. Megan or Anthony Tribuno? No questions? No questions. Julia Rich Pace? Dana or Andrew Jacob?
No questions.
Mirka Walczek?
No questions.
Mary or Mark Donovan?
Nothing for this witness.
Abigail Freed?
Hi. So it's been a while since my course in historic preservation, so I have a question for you. Can can you talk a little bit about the vernacular ordinary architecture and protections that would, and whether or not that would or wouldn't relate to this structure, and why wouldn't it?
So if I understand what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the value of preserving vernacular architecture as opposed to just kind of the high style.
Correct. Yeah, the ordinary.
So I think that there is definitely value, and I would even generally advocate for it. I presented in front of the Vernacular Architecture Forum, which is a nationwide organization, at actually multiple conferences of theirs. And there is a whole discussion to be had about whether, especially when you look at the aspects of integrity, does that select in favor of the preservation of more high style, traditionally like some big mansion, as opposed to a typical farm. But I guess it's something where I also would say that there are many examples of very good examples, I'll say, of vernacular architecture where they do have integrity, or they do have, in the case of a farm, it has multiple outbuildings that are still extant. And, looking through this, there are, corn cribs, machine sheds, chicken houses that historically were located here that are no longer here. And so when you take that in addition to, not only are there additions on the house, the tenant house, but there's been alterations to, windows are kind of one of the big hang-ups, but windows have been replaced. Doors have almost certainly been replaced. In the interior, the floor plan has been altered and changed around. It's something where the vernacular architecture that might be apparent in some buildings isn't really as strongly apparent within this structure.
But isn't the fact that it is actually a representation, not the best representation, but it is a capsule in time of various time periods, make it kind of an interesting case study? So when you get into the change over time aspect, and I realize that we're not necessarily talking National Register here, but I'm going to make note that in Pennsylvania's agricultural guidelines, there is a whole section change over time, and there are. I can even think there's a property that I assessed last year in Adams County where it had a farmhouse where it was an 1870s farmhouse, but then it had a 1950s kitchen addition. And the kitchen was in really good shape. It had an exhaust fan, the interior, the windows. And that shows that, yes, this continued to be utilized as a farm. They continued to update it over time. There does reach a point, though, where all of these properties have what are considered a period of significance. Typically, the National Register only looks at, and I would say beyond the National Register, a lot of places don't look at properties that are younger than 50 years of age. So while all of these additions were put on, they really don't, it's really at a point, it's an old house that gets any addition put on. What story is that telling? Is it telling the story of how this was a farm that continued to be adapted, or is this they had the National Christian Conference Center used this as potential employee housing and they put on a modern kitchen? It's really, what is the context in which you are evaluating this? Because just by itself, we can say something is historic, but ideally, you should be looking at it in the picture of the township's history and the region's history, and how does this relate to all of that? But didn't it initially start as a tenant house?
It did.
And up until it was purchased, it was still a tenant house. It was a rental.
I don't know whether it was rented or not. I think either it was rented or it may have been rented or used by employees of the various organizations that have owned this. I guess one of a way I might look at that is if you're saying, it remained a tenant house, but not always, because from 1923 about till 1970, after the property at 1497 Valley Forge Road had been carved off, because the owner of the farm, he was like, I'm done with farming. He retired, and he sold the tenant house and the farm to a farmer. Actually, to a developer who rented it to a farmer. But it was used as a gentleman's farm. So it wasn't continuously used as a tenant house. And I would say, all right, what is an example then of a house that is significant for being a tenant house if a house that's been used continuously as a tenant house that isn't significant for that? And it's kind of, a road or a railroad were used to transport goods and people between places and locations. Well, isn't that kind of a road or a railroad? Isn't a house a place where people live? So what sets it apart and makes it particularly significant and worthy of being recognized?
Okay, thanks.
Lachelle or Kevin Wilfong?
No questions.
Amanda or Brad Gemsener?
No questions. Thank you.
Frank or Diane Donatelli? Are they not here? Okay, I'll strike them off. Stephanie or Sean Quigley?
No questions.
And that's the end of my list. Any board questions?
I've got one. Looking at page 52, where it talked about the transfer of the property. I guess it was the Valentine family.
Yes.
Ran a store on the property.
Yes.
For some years and then sold it to the Bat family.
Yes.
And there's a description when the Bat family put it up for sale. Looks like around 1980, where it said 2 separate and complete sets of buildings. And in the sale documents, it says, good description, it says a good stone house containing 6 rooms. Well and excellent water at the door, a good stone barn, 40 by 60 feet. Goes on to talk about the other things there, the corn crib and all that good stuff. But from what I'm hearing, that good stone house containing 6 rooms, you haven't been able to identify where that is? The barn, or was that?
That is this
A,
house.
B, C, and D?
So that would be presumably with 6 rooms. If B, C, and D are all 20th century additions, those would not have been present at the time. The passageway in between floors 1 and 2 indicates that there may have been at that time a wing of the house that was since demolished. We're not certain, but there would have been, it indicates that there would have been 6 rooms. We don't know how they were distributed through the house or whatever.
So you can't see where that foundation was or where some of those walls are still standing inside of Section A?
So inside Section A, there's I'll call it a scar on the first floor of where there was a subdivision, and you can even in the molding is cut out. We're not sure when that wall was removed or when it was put in to begin with. And then on the second floor has been divided up so that there's now a bathroom. And so we're not sure. That looks like a early to mid 20th century bathroom. So what the layout of the room was prior to that, I'm not certain.
Okay. Any questions, Tammy?
Hi, so I wanted to point you to page 74 of the ACOM report.
Yes.
And specifically, I'm looking at 7.1.4, feasibility of continuing the current use or other uses permitted in the zoning district. And so the way I read that is it's one or the other. That your response that you've written there is no alternative use, i.e. agricultural or commercial, is feasibly viable for the property under current zoning laws. But I believe what the call of that question is, could there be a continuation of the current use? And the current use, even though it's zoned R1, it's really being used as administrative and research right now. So was it your intent to say that there's an impossibility for a continuation of the administrative and research use of the property?
So this is information we were provided by our client, and To the best of my knowledge, I don't know if there is an impediment. It would be, I guess, up to the township whether they would be fine with the existing use being grandfathered in under R1.
Okay. And then the other question I had is that this statement is that agriculture is not feasibly viable because the lands are physically constrained for viable agriculture. Could you explain your statement there?
So, again, this is information coming from our client, but I would even say that in part due to steep slopes and grades on the river side of the property, the wooded area, and the existing buildings that are there, I would assume that this would potentially not be able to be used for agriculture, but that's speculation on my part. I'm not an expert in that.
Okay, so a portion of the property could not be used for agriculture.
At least a portion could not be, yes.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask you, and I think I've asked the other witness this question, the stone wall that is a part of that that exterior enclosure attached to the barn, you had testified that it could have dated from the original, the date of the building of the barn or sometime very shortly thereafter. In your experience, is it possible to remediate stone walls such as that to bring them back to a historically significant state?
So
And I'm asking, it's possible.
Yeah. If it's possible, yeah. At the barnyard wall, there's no reason why it couldn't be possible to remediate.
Okay, thank you.
Requirements in the report. Does the ordinance itself require them to all be something that you're an expert in, or did we just do this for ease for the board to take a look at everything comprehensively?
No, as far as I understand, this was just done to create a comprehensive report that the board could look at, a singular document.
And just for clarification, I know there was reference earlier in some of the questioning to you of a farm, this being a farmhouse or a farmhouse barn assemblage, as we've noted, and it's correct. This was not the farmhouse associated with this farm, to the best of your knowledge, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, for the vast majority of the property's history, this was not what we refer to as the tenant house. Was not the main house associated with this barn. Correct.
Thank you.
Does that bring any additional questions from any other party?
Just one. Figured you just testified that the HRIS was a document that was prepared for the ease of the board's reference. Is that your testimony?
For the historical committee, it's prepared because it's required.
Okay. You are the author of that report, correct? So on
Yes.
the first page of the document after the cover sheet, it says quality information prepared by Samuel A. Pickard, preservation planner. That's your signature there, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Okay. Anything further from the board? Okay. I think we're done with that witness. Are you just making a comment? Because right now we're just getting into questions for the witness. We can get back to Mr. Wickstrom. Okay. Kara, do you need a break? You okay?
I'm going to be here for another 2 hours, yes.
Go off the record. It's right now 7:49.
We started at 7. We did an hour and a half.
That's agreeable to me. How many more? You have one witness?
I have one additional witness, and then I believe Mr. Gill has a witness.
We did. I did.
I can't be here that night.
I'm good. Stop it. We just go all the way through this. Anybody got any time things? I'm comfortable to go through. So, consensus seems to be 9 o'clock. To wrap it up by then, if not, we may have to have another continuance.
Okay. Kara, do you need a break then? Okay. Yeah, why don't we take 5 minutes? Okay, we're back on the record, and I think the applicant has an additional witness.
And I just have a brief point of order before we move on to that. Given that this has taken about 2 hours and there are 2 more witnesses and then also public comment, is it the intent of the board to finish this tonight, or is it the intent of the board to just get as much in as we possibly can tonight and then move to the next continuance?
We would hope to finish it tonight if we can.
Microphone.
I think the hopes are to finish it tonight if we can. If not, and if it looks like it's going to go a lot longer, we're going to have a discussion then.
It's a hard stop at 9, you said.
Yeah, hard stop at
9 p.m.
Yeah,
9
just
p.m.
given my experience with all of these, it seems unlikely that it would finish tonight. But I mean, it is at the pleasure of the board. But I know there are a bunch of neighbors here who have things to do in the morning too. So.
Yeah, and then we've got a meeting after.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
Okay. That's a fair point.
I think all we can say is the applicants indicated they have 1 more witness. Mr. Gill has a witness himself. Sometimes these things fly by. Sometimes, obviously, as you've seen, they don't. So we just have to wait and see.
Let's see what we can do.
Okay. Zara, turn back over to you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call Jay Rosen.
Yes, ma'am.
Jay, could you state your name and business address for the record, please?
My name is J.B. Rosen, R-O-S-E-N. My company name is S as in Sam, E as in Edward, the number 2, Engineering LLC. We reside at 1705 Butler Pike, which is in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, 19428.
And what's your position with SE2 Engineering LLC?
I am the principal structural engineer.
And could you briefly describe your educational background and professional experience for the board, please?
I am a Drexel boy. I am local. I went to Drexel from 1983 to 1988. My master's in 1991. I am licensed as of February 1992. I have been in engineering for 45 years.
We have Mr. Rosen's CV marked as Exhibit A17, and I'd like to offer him as an expert in structural engineering.
Mr. Gill, any questions as to his background?
Yes. Mr. Rosen, I see you have general experience with regard to structural engineering, and your education is in civil engineering. Is that correct?
Yes, structural engineering is a subset of civil engineering.
Okay.
My concentration in Drexel was structures and soils.
Okay.
But they classify it as a civil engineering degree.
And what is your experience, if any, with regard to structural engineering, specifically with regard to historic structures?
I have done many historical structures. I have done barns. I have done structures of all types, from your backyard deck to 10 stories. Anything from a school to a church to a home to a residence to apartment houses to historical structures. I have renovated them and done light materials and so on.
You don't specialize in structural engineering vis-a-vis historic structures, do you?
No.
Okay, so within the past 5 years, how many historic structures have you analyzed?
I would probably say 1 or 2 a year, so probably 5 to 10.
Okay, and how many of those were barns?
Probably 3 or 4.
And where are those located?
I do a lot of work for Toll Brothers, so they tend to buy up the same type of thing that Bentley is doing. Talminson, Charleston, Westchester.
Okay. And of the barns that you, for which you've analyzed the structural condition of those on behalf of Toll Brothers or Bentley, how many of those have you found to be in poor structural condition?
I would say most of them. Yes, all of them. Yeah. Yeah, they are designed as barns. They are not designed for clubhouses. They are not designed for residences. They are designed for farm machinery and livestock.
Okay. So do I take that then to mean that your conclusions regarding the structural integrity of
I have a question. We were just qualifying him as a structural engineer, an expert in structural engineering. This seems as though it's going into
You're starting it into substance.
Okay.
Do you have any
The substance?
qualifications?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Rosen appears to be qualified with regard to structural engineering, generally speaking, but he appears to have limited experience with regard to structural engineering vis-a-vis historic structures. So I have no objection to his qualification as a witness with regard to structural engineering, generally reserving the right to object with regard to any specialized knowledge of historic structures.
Okay. Do any of the neighbors have any questions as to the witness's background and area of proffered expertise? Seeing none. Okay. So does the board have any questions of it? So I think we'll admit him as an expert in those areas. Certainly those critiques or questions can be ones that are credibility determinations that are made by the various parties. But the bar for what's considered an expert in Pennsylvania, it's not a high bar. It's someone who has more than the reasonable average person would have in that particular field.
And again, we don't object to his qualification as a structural engineer generally.
Understand.
and that's all I'm asking to qualify him as right now.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Are you familiar with the subject structures and the applicable regulations of the Schuylkill Township zoning ordinance or its building codes?
Yes.
Were you responsible for the preparation of what we have marked as Exhibit A8, a structural engineering report dated, November 19th, 2025?
Yes.
Did you visit the property and structurally evaluate the tenant house and the barn before preparing your report that is marked as Exhibit A8? When did you visit the property?
I visited approximately that time, maybe a few days before that, the 17th of November, 18th of November.
Can you briefly describe your findings with respect to the barn and how you believe it was constructed, as well as what it appears today?
From what I understand, the barn was built in 1834. That's from the date stone that we see. It's primarily a wood structure. There are 3-by-wood joists on the later additions. The main barn is done by hewn trees. There are trees that are supporting, or hewn trees, logs that are supporting that. It's overlain by plank. It is accessible from one side, the upper level was typically used for hay and farm equipment, where the lower level was used for livestock storage and feed and milking the cows and so on.
Did you also take a look at the condition of the additions to this barn that were used for things other than the barn?
Yes.
And could you describe what you observed with respect to those additions?
The additions are a later thing. They're made out of mass-produced materials that were erected, whereas the barn was erected from natural materials that were gathered on the site and erected at that time.
And with respect to renovations required to make use of the structure. I think you've heard testimony tonight that the intent is to retain the core of the barn. Do you have an opinion on what would need to be done to make this structure usable?
What I would say is the barn right now is in a minus condition. It's not even a barn or capable of supporting and being a barn at this point.
Objection, move to strike. The witness isn't qualified to testify about whether it's capable of being.
I'm a structural engineer. I am a licensed professional. I did an evaluation on it, a structural analysis, assigning yield stresses.
I think the board
and deflections to the wood structure to see if it's capable.
So I think the board can take his testimony and give it the weight that it believes it's due.
Can I clarify a question? When you say capable, do you mean it is not feasible to render it in a condition that it could be used as a barn, or that today, as it stands today, it cannot be a barn?
Mr. Rosen, only one person can speak at a time, so the court reporter can capture.
Yes. Yes, the condition is in today.
Okay.
And anything can be repaired, anything can be renovated, anything can be reinforced.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that it's in a state of disrepair at this point.
Thank you. I think it's the word, your use of the word capable that was confusing.
Okay. So the barn is not capable of supporting or sustaining loads even as a barn. To try to get it to a higher use, such as a clubhouse, as an apartment house, it doesn't have that capability. So you not only have to bring it up to it being a barn, it then has to be superseded. And this is all I'm throwing at it is material. It has to be treated for mold. There's mold infestation in it. The roof has leaked. It is in a series of disrepair. It has been repaired on occasion. There are good repairs. There are bad repairs. There are repairs that have not been maintained. And this is the issue with barns. There's rot through it. There is cracking. There is, water that's been allowed to, stormwater that's been allowed to dump on the ground. The roofing hasn't been maintained. It hasn't been insulated properly and so on.
And when you reference load requirements, if you could just explain a little more about what that means and your analysis of those load requirements with respect to when this barn was constructed and why you are giving that opinion.
Okay, I'm responsible to follow the International Building Codes. It's the IRC, which is the International Residential Code, or the International Building Code, which is put out by the things that's evolving from the old BOCA code and UCC codes. Within that, it dictates certain live loads and certain occupancies that require certain live loads in order to be considered safe. These codes come out of the early 1900s Chicago fire, New York fire, where they basically burned down city blocks. And these codes came into existence to prevent the spread of fire through it. It started out as a life safety code. So the codes that are in existence now, since they started, have only gotten stricter and stricter and stricter. And this structure was erected well before that. There were no safety codes. You were lucky if you were the chief of police looking at this when it was being constructed.
So if you're familiar with the township zoning ordinance, there are 5 adaptive reuses that are permitted in the R1 district: multifamily, general office, inn, restaurant, a daycare center. And if any of these adaptive reuses would be put into the barn, in your opinion, what would that result in?
The higher uses, such as an inn or a restaurant, is assembly use. That's 100 pounds a square foot. Residential use is 40 pounds a square foot. Barns are probably somewhere, this barn came up about 20 pounds a square foot. So it's not even close to that. While that could be considered light residential, it's close to the minimal 30-pound load that you could use for sleeping areas. It's still significantly below that. So any adaptive reuse, again, if I'm put to the criteria of a new building, it significantly needs to be reinforced.
At the first hearing, there was a question about whether mold that was observed, that was mentioned in your report, was caused by recent events on the property. Are you able to speak to the age of the mold that you observed in the barn?
Objection. The witness hasn't been qualified as an expert in mold or mold remediation. Qualified as a structural engineer.
I'll withdraw that question. Did you also take a look at the tenant house structure on the property?
Yes.
And did you take a look at what would need to be done to that particular structure and what its current condition is today?
The tenant house is mostly a more modern structure. It does have defects. The riser and tread patterns on the stairs don't meet the current requirements. It has been air conditioned since it was originally constructed, so that those modifications have been butchered in, for lack of a better word. There's openings in the stone walls that are original, don't have steel lintels in them. The floors are not level. The floors are not plumb. The walls are not plumb. Windows have been replaced, etc.
And other,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
And the roofing itself needs to be replaced. The roofing on both buildings is substantially compromised or very much at the end of its lifetime.
And in your opinion, regardless of the applicant's proposal to save and stabilize the core of the barn, in your opinion, based on your structural analysis, do you believe that there would be a large quantity of repair and modification needed to both in order to adaptively reuse them and bring them up to livable standards today?
Absolutely.
Okay. I have no further questions for Mr. Rosen.
Mr. Gill, do you have any questions?
Yes. Mr. Rosen, during your qualification as an expert, you were telling us about the work that you've done for Toll Brothers. Did you say other home builders or just Toll Brothers?
I can.
And Toll Brothers and other home builders?
Toll Brothers, Orleans, Gambone, Bentley. I can. Who would you like to refer to?
You're sort of the go-to guy for structural analysis for home builders, right?
I've been doing business for 45 years.
Okay. Within the last 5 to 10 years of doing that work, you said that you analyzed 3 or 4 barns, correct?
Yes.
All right. And now I'll ask you again, how many of those barns did you find to be structurally deficient?
I would say all of them.
Okay. And how many of those barns did you recommend demolition of as opposed to renovation and adaptive reuse?
One was reused. They spent the money to convert it to a clubhouse. One they took partially down because the windows were slotted, and it was a certain particular type of masonry that they, the way it was constructed, and they elected to preserve that.
All right. Thank you. That wasn't my question. My question was, how many did you recommend to be demolished?
Again, it's a process. This is, to me, I say it's structurally deficient.
Okay. How many of the barns that you analyzed over the last several years did you recommend to be demolished?
Again, it depends on their use. So I would say maybe half of them, because most of them are in disrepair.
So of the 3 or 4 barns that you analyzed for home builder clients over the last 5 years or so, you recommended that 2 of those be demolished and 2 of them be retained?
Yes.
Where were the ones that you recommended be retained?
I would object to that. I mean, this is not relevant to the application at hand.
I'm getting to the witness's credibility.
So I think you can answer the question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Where were the ones that you recommended be retained?
The one in Westchester, and there was one in, I believe, Lancaster.
So notwithstanding the fact that all of the structures suffered from structural deficiency, as you pointed out, you found that 2 of those could be retained, and you recommended as much, correct?
It depended on the use that they were being put to. If I was asked to reinforce it, I reinforced it. If they were asked for the windows to remain, the windows remained.
Okay, so it is possible, as you testified a moment ago, to structurally reinforce an historic structure such that it can be retained, correct?
Yes.
Has your client in this matter asked you to analyze what it would take to structurally reinforce either the barn or the tenant house?
Can you repeat that,
Has your
please?
client in this matter that we're here for this evening asked you for recommendations regarding the structural reinforcement of either the tenant house or the barn?
No, he is not.
Because they have not, is it fair to assume that you have not conducted any cost analysis of the cost of structurally reinforcing the structures?
I have not, but you can buy a lot of demolition for reconstruction.
Okay. But you have not conducted an analysis of the costs and expense associated with rehabilitating these structures?
No.
Getting back to the barn itself, you said that you looked at the condition of the barn and the additions. Would you turn your attention to, if you have it there, Exhibit A18?
Okay.
I start on the first page of A18A. Did you prepare this representation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what is this based upon?
This is based upon my visual inspection and tour of the structures.
Okay, so A18A is a representation of the barn that's the subject of, well, was the subject of this application, correct?
Yes.
Now, utilizing the exhibits, the photographs that are attached to A18, would you tell us the differentiation in these photographs between what you refer to as the barn and what you refer to as the additions?
The additions are part of the barn. You want me to go through each picture and explain what each picture is, or?
And let me just make sure, I'm not trying to play gotcha. I'm trying to understand the applicant's proposal to retain the core of the barn versus demolish or remove, the non-historic structure. So that's what I'd really like for you to help us understand. What is proposed to be retained and what is proposed to be removed?
I believe that's been clarified by previous testimony with the exhibits that are up there right now.
Okay.
I mean, I can show you in my pictures, but they're the same pictures.
All right. So is everything that's proposed to be removed falling in the category of the non-historic core of the barn?
From what I understand, I'm not really involved in historic or not historic. My feeling is that the additions are later. Yes, they're more modern construction methods and materials. And my understanding is that the older structure is to remain.
All right, let me ask the question a different way. Is everything that the applicant is proposing to remove an addition within your understanding? And by addition, I mean something that was built in the 20th century. Is that your understanding of?
Yes.
Okay. So again, everything that the applicant is proposing to remove is something that was added to the barn during the 20th century.
Yes. That's my understanding.
I'd like to talk about the stone wall in the barnyard area. Did you examine or analyze the structural integrity of the stone wall?
The existing stone wall that is there has cracked and visibly moved. There is a piece of it that has been fallen and is missing. You can actually see it right there on the corner.
Have you ever conducted, I might ask you just about this application, but have you ever conducted an analysis of the cost to rebuild a stone wall around a barnyard like this?
Particularly a barnyard? Probably not, but I've done analysis on stone walls.
Okay. And given your experience and your knowledge, is there a unit price? Can we assign a unit price to repairing a stone wall like this?
Okay, the answer to that is no. It's very difficult. The reason why is you are dealing with materials that, again, were native to the area. So in other words, there's no mortar in there. It's a lime mortar. It's a mud lime mortar. Portland cement didn't exist to that. So the modern masonry materials that we use today are not. Beyond that, this is a stone wall that was fitted together by a mason at that time. To find someone that can do that can take the stone and move it and do it with a chisel versus today where they have modular units and they put them together is a different level of skill, and you pay for that skill.
Okay, but it can be done.
Anything can be done.
Okay. And what if the wall was to be reconstructed using modern methodology?
The issue is integrating them together and integrating new and old together. So you would either have the appearance of a joint or a crack would occur. It wouldn't behave the same because it's different material.
All right. Your testimony on direct was about the structural load of the barn, but I think you testified also that the structural integrity could be reinforced, correct?
Yes.
The historic preservation consultant testified that there are hazardous materials in both the barn and in the barn's roof and in the farmhouse. Were you here for that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. What is that hazardous material, if you know?
I do not know. I would venture asbestos just because that was a very common building material, but that's total speculation.
Okay. To your knowledge, is the mold a hazardous substance?
The mold is a hazardous substance. Can be. Yeah.
Can mold be remediated?
The answer to that, let me give you my mold speech. Mold is an ancient organism. It's a microscopic organism. It has been around forever. There are good molds. There are bad molds. Good molds examples: antibiotics, blue cheese, mushrooms, truffles. Bad molds tend to be respiratory. They tend to affect old and young. They do methyl alcohols. They do woods. We do ethyl alcohols, a few more carbon and hydrogen atoms, beer and wine, fruit and grain. Although we can poison ourselves with ethyls too. The molds, in order to have a mold infestation, you need three things. You need mold, you need a food source, you need moisture. As an engineer, I tend to take out the moisture component of that. I try to reduce moisture in it. And the way that we do that is we try to separate cold and hot, especially with a dew point, which is really the iced tea phenomenon. It's condensation. We try to get that into the insulated cavity, which is spun glass, so it doesn't have the ability to eat that, so it can't eat it. Mold will eat anything that is wood, cardboard, backing of drywall, lath, wrapping around insulation wires. It will eat all of that stuff and cause rot and deterioration. If the mold is there and the moisture is taken out, the mold goes dormant. As soon as the moisture is reintroduced, the mold will activate. Basically, there's two ways to kill it. One, by far the more common method, is a fungicide, which is a bleach-based solution. Basically, you put it onto the mold, you let it sit there, it basically explodes the mold. The other method is heat, and by heat, I mean intense heat. I have done this once in my career. I have tented a building, and you put like 140 degrees for like 3 or 4 days. Constant. Has to be monitored, fed, salamander heaters, etc. And that's really what I can tell you about mold.
Okay. Mold is not a condition that is unique to historic structures, right?
No.
And in fact, mold commonly is remediated in all kinds of structures, right?
Yes.
All right. And just like similarly, mold could be remediated in these structures, correct?
Yes.
With regard to your report, other than the mold and the conditions that you note in your report, other than the mold, is there anything about the tenant farmhouse that cannot be, is there anything in your report with regard to the tenant house which could not be addressed through structural remediation?
The answer to that is no, but this all costs money, and it all accumulates over, as you go. And so just so you understand, I mean, not only does it need to be structurally modified, you're talking about modern materials, or if you want to go to like materials, cost more money, higher level of skill to put it in, and so on. So, I mean, there's ratcheting up of orders of magnitude, if I can, of, money that needs to be put into the structure to make it function, per the code at this point.
All right, but again, thank you.
And it can be done, yes.
Thank you. But again, to your knowledge, neither you nor anybody else on behalf of your client have performed any analysis of the costs of addressing the items that are in your letter dated November 19, 2025. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
The historic core of the farmhouse, what we heard referred to earlier as Block A. Do you understand that's what I mean when I say the historic core?
Yeah, you mean the tenant house?
I'm sorry, yes. Tenant house.
Yes.
If we were to remove blocks B, C, and D, is it possible to build a new home around the historic core of the tenant house?
Anything is possible.
Okay. Have you, or has anybody to your knowledge on behalf of your client, conducted an analysis to determine whether that could happen, or how much that would cost to build such a home?
Not that I'm aware of.
So just doubling back then to your opinion that the tenant house and the barn require work to enhance their structural integrity. That's a characteristic that's shared by many historic or older structures, correct?
Yes.
So is it your testimony then that there's nothing particularly unique or imminently dangerous or harmful about these particular structures?
That I would disagree with. There's multiple deflections within these hewn lumber timbers that were visibly rotted. There have been repairs that have been made that are unusual, that someone jammed the pipe in or, kind of took a branch off to try to support it. There's been things that have been added to, again, some engineered, some non-engineered. So these are unique, based on the structure itself. In other words, they would have to be taken apart. They would have to be surveyed, analyzed, taken apart, and then reinforced accordingly.
But none of those creates a situation that cannot be addressed.
Anything can be done.
And none of those unique conditions that you just testified to creates any danger of imminent collapse of these buildings, correct?
You would employ someone like me to make sure that doesn't happen.
That's all I have.
Okay, going down the list of the neighbors, Keith Wickstrom.
Oh.
Actually, here. Or I'll give them that easy. Whichever one is easiest. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
In your report, you had a number of exhibits, and we can use this one as an example. When you stepped on site, did the lines of the property, the structures on the property look good to you as an engineer? Were the walls plumb, square?
Can I just as a point of clarification, when you're referring to
Oh, exhibit.
that's not part of his report, that's a separate exhibit.
Okay. Okay. Do you
Just
have,
as a point of clarification.
well, do you have some
Hold
photographs
on,
that you
wait,
took?
one sec. So they're referencing exhibit A18, one of the photographs in there.
Sure, we can reference that.
That's fine.
Yeah, I
Okay.
just want to clarify.
When you look at that exhibit, do the lines on that structure look good to you? Does the roof look good structurally?
I would say no.
No. What do you see in that roof that doesn't look square
I see
or
that
straight?
the roofing itself has deteriorated.
Sure.
The stucco is peeling. There's visible vegetation on it, which leads me to conclude that there may be things that need further examination, need to be evaluated.
Okay, but structurally, does it look good to you?
The answer to that is no. I can't. I have to evaluate it.
We see that very differently. Okay, well, then in your evaluation, you visually inspected both buildings. You noticed that beams were visibly deflected in the barn. Is that unusual for hand-hewn beams not to deflect at times?
The answer is everything does deflect. It's a permanence. What we try to do is we try to design in the elastic range. So if you've ever gotten stopped on a bridge, you will feel the bridge go up and down. Yes, things deflect. What I'm talking about is a permanent set.
Right.
That's what I try to avoid. And this is permanently set. It's deteriorated and damaged.
Okay. You noticed that the columns in the basement of the barn, you did not know whether or not they had footings underneath them. Was there any extra effort taken to see whether or not they had any kind of foundation or footing underneath the lolly columns there?
No, but I would doubt there would be. Again, considering the age of it, there's no reinforced concrete that exists in 1830.
But these were steel columns, I think, right?
Most were hewn lumber. Most of them were logs.
Okay.
There were replacements that were done over time. And that's what I'm referring to when I saw steel columns or pipe that was added. There were repairs that were done through the ages.
Okay. Walk me through then, if you will. If the columns are sinking down into the ground, was that noticed on the first floor?
I did not see the columns sinking on the ground. I never said that.
So we don't know whether they were or not.
No, whether the columns were sinking?
Yeah.
I didn't see the columns sinking.
Okay. Getting to the, what you call the farmhouse, you stated that the farmhouse is a 2- and 3-story wood framed structure. Maybe that's just a typo.
It's mostly, well, I meant the infill floors. Yes, the exterior walls are masonry and stone.
Okay. Can we bring up the exhibit with the 4 different parts of the floor plan of the farmhouse?
Is that exhibit A13?
Okay. Looking at that, again, I think we're saying that the portion of it that is called A was the original portion. That portion, I think we've determined, is stone construction.
Yes.
Looking at the other sections there, sections B, C, and D, in your professional opinion, if we were to remove section C from the other 3 sections, would section A crumble to the ground?
I would venture no, but I would certainly look at the interface between the 2 structures to see how they interact.
Okay. In general, how are those constructed? I've done a little bit of that myself through the years.
Usually they're wall bearing, and that's where I'm concerned. They either have pockets or probably a ledger against the wall. And as a result, if they do bear on the wall, they would have to be shored to be able to be taken out, or that the wall itself would have to be put together. It may be as simple as taking them out of the pockets. It may have to require some shoring. I didn't do that investigation.
Okay. Okay. And let's go a little further. Let's remove both B, C, and D. Do you think that structure A, given the proper construction techniques, would stand on its own?
What I would say is that probably if A was originally built and these were added, which is what we're saying, that A could remain with taking the pieces off. However, I would caution, because this building has been significantly modified. There's been holes punched through, there's been openings created, there's been floors removed, stairways removed, and that would caution me that it would have to be investigated before anything is done. So everything would have to be opened up, visible, and then a demolition
So a very
idea, done. Yes.
A very thorough
A plan.
investigation.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Then, again, with the house, you mentioned that the front porch would require scraping and painting.
Yes.
Okay. And the winder stair didn't have a handrail on it.
Yes.
Okay. So going through those items, you came to the conclusion, and it says here, in fact, I'll quote it, "It is my professional opinion that the farmhouse and barn structures together with their additions should be demolished."
Yes, that's my opinion.
Okay. I respectfully disagree.
Tammy Wickstrom? Megan or Anthony Tribuno? Julia Rich Pace? Dana or Andrew Jacob? Mirka Walczek? Mary or Mark Donovan? Abigail Freed? Lachelle or Kevin Wilfong? I think she had to leave. Amanda or Brad Gensinger? Stephanie or Sean Quigley? Mark Donovan?
Right. Generally, when considering rehab versus demolition, what are you looking at for your criteria when you're doing that? Just a general.
Normally, it's orders of magnitude. Usually reconstruction takes significantly more money because not only are you reinforcing it, you have to find the skilled labor to do it. And this is what I meant when I said demolition. You can buy a lot of demolition for reconstruction. Demolition guys, nothing. Let me finish, please.
Okay.
Nothing against them, but they come with a backhoe, and in 2 days it's down. Whereas now you're talking about getting a beam up to the third floor, lifting it in place, shoring it, maybe taking a window out and getting it in place. Much higher skilled labor, much more cost. The material is costly, and so on.
Okay. Are you looking at it in terms of the relative cost for demolition versus, or relative cost and labor and everything else in terms of demolition versus rehabilitation of the structure, and keeping that in the package? Or are you looking at it comprehensively versus the whole project that it's being proposed as a part of? Say, like, this is a proposal for 50 lots after this. Is this looked at differently in the context of that, or is it looked at just in the context of the structure itself?
I was looking in the context of the structure itself. To me, if I take into account the rest of the buildings, I would say it would change that, but I'm looking specifically for those structures.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for clarification on. Thank you.
Okay.
Any board member questions?
To follow up on the demolition versus rehabilitation cost,
yes.
To your point, it sounds like demolition is always cheaper. But I think what you were getting at is there a breaking point at some point where 10 times the cost of rehabilitation makes it worth it versus 100 times? Is that what you're hinting at? Because it always seems like demolition is always going to be cheaper.
Demolition, if it was a small repair or an easy repair, I wouldn't recommend demolition. Something that could be simple. But this is significant. This is quite a bit of work that needs to be done. And there are many things wrong with these structures. They don't make the loading. It needs new roofing. It needs insulation. It doesn't meet any of the present codes. And that's what I'm saying. So whatever work would need to be done would be significant. And again, I'm comparing that to a demolition cost, which would be, was a much easier known quantity.
Okay.
You mentioned that one of the barns that you had inspected in your line of work over the past 5 years was developed into a clubhouse. Where was that located?
That was done for a Toll Brothers development. I believe it was Westchester. But what that involved was significant reinforcement. So in other words, we were adding steel and wood, and basically the barn was rebuilt, for lack of a better word.
Was that one of the barns that you had recommended for demolition?
I did not recommend that one be demolished. They came to me to get it repaired.
So you weren't in a position to make a recommendation because they had already determined they were going to rebuild it prior to engaging your services?
Yes.
Okay. In evaluating the property, you conducted site inspections, and I apologize, I don't have your, this may be in an exhibit, but what were the dates of the site inspections? How many times did you visit the site? And generally, you can say which month if you don't remember the dates.
It was November of last year, November 25.
Okay, November 25.
Yes.
Do you know if that was, and it was only one visit, one site
visit.
inspection?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Are you aware of whether that was before or after the water damage that occurred due to the utilities not being
I
turned off?
believe it was before, because my understanding that the water damage occurred due to the temperatures, due to the wonderful winter that we just had, so it caused the pipes to break. But I did not see any water in the basement at the time,
Okay.
or significant water in the basement at the time I was there.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to the stone wall that's attached, is that stone wall attached to the barn?
I'm not sure if it's integrally tied in, but it's what I would call it the barnyard, if I could call it anything.
Have you done an assessment as to whether that's a structural component of the barn?
It's not a structural component of the barn. It's strictly a fence type wall.
And does that then impact the extent to which it would take to stabilize it so it doesn't further collapse?
Nothing has been done to stabilize it, and that has not been maintained at all. Again, I don't think it affects the barn itself, but it's the wall itself that is collapsing.
What would you do to stabilize it from further collapse?
You would have to basically sound it and remove everything that is bad, so to speak. In other words, I would have to start from a solid base, clean it, and then you would start and rehab it into an engineered structure, into a new stone wall. And that may be almost taking it all the way down and starting up again.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Does that draw any redirect from applicant?
I have no redirect from Mr. President.
Okay. Any further witnesses for the applicant?
I do not.
Okay. So I presume you're then moving exhibits A1 through A18 into the record?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, so they're moved in. We have 11 minutes till 9 o'clock.
I'll be fast.
Mr. Wise is quick, but is there any expectation that we'll complete him tonight in 11 minutes?
I don't know until
Yeah.
testimony whether I'll have any cross, so.
Has his report been shared with
He
the
doesn't have a
applicant?
report. He's going to testify from his own personal background as the Township Historic Preservation Consultant, his visit to the property, and yeah, so we don't have an actual report.
Okay. Okay, 11 minutes. Let's go. That's what happens.
Save time by taking one test now. And Ms. Zara, may we have a stipulation as to Mr. Wise's expertise in the fields of architectural historian and historic preservation planning?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Wise, will you go ahead and be sworn?
Yes.
Please don't act like
I'm down to 10 minutes. All right. Mr. Wise, is he admitted as an expert in those areas?
Any objections from other neighbors? Okay, seeing none, yes.
All right. In addition to the areas that you've been qualified as an expert in, have you, in the course of your work, considered the structural integrity of historic structures?
Not from an engineering standpoint,
Okay,
no.
but from an architectural historian's perspective, do you oftentimes go into a historic structure and look at the structural integrity of it?
I look at the overall condition of a building.
The overall condition. Okay. Putting a pin in that for a moment, you have a significant amount of experience with barns in Chester County, correct?
Correct.
Would you very quickly give us an overview of that experience?
I've been in a architectural historian since the early 90s. I worked as the Brandywine Conservancy Historic Preservation Planner. Then I had my own firm, Wise Preservation Planning, for roughly 20 years. And since 2015, I worked as a architectural historian with the Richard Grubb and Associates, RGA, which I retired at the beginning of the year. At least I thought I retired.
All right. But I keep calling.
You keep calling.
All right. And as part of that career that you just described, have you served as the historic preservation consultant for municipalities in southeastern Pennsylvania?
Yes, Schuylkill, East Brandywine, Upper Euclid, Kennett, among others.
You mentioned Schuylkill a moment ago. So was it you or your firm, Wise Preservation Planning, that prepared the township's historic resource inventory and map back in 2010?
Yes.
You served as a consultant for that project, correct?
Correct.
Are you familiar with the inventory recommendation for historic resource number 63?
Yes.
What is historic resource number 63?
Well, it's 1485 Schuylkill Road and, Valley Forge Road. And it consists of a farmhouse and barn and other buildings associated with the more institutional use. And as far as the recommendation for classification, is that what you asked for? It states both the farmhouse and the barn have been altered, probably making the property not eligible for the National Register. The property is also no longer used for agricultural purposes. The farmhouse is quite old, however, and locally significant, and we recommended Class 2.
All right. So 2010, however, was not the first time, to your knowledge, that the barn and the farmhouse were included on the township's inventory of historic resources, correct?
Yeah, it was surveyed between 1980 and 1982.
Okay, so the 2010 recommendation was a recommendation to retain the Class 2 classification, correct?
We recommended Class 2 based on the ordinance language.
Okay, all right, fair enough. We've heard some reference, first of all, were you here for testimony by Mr. Picard on behalf of the applicant?
Yes.
Okay. And did you hear his reference to the recommendation in the historic resource inventory that the structure was quite old?
I did, yes.
Do you recall whether it was you or somebody in your firm who made the notation in the inventory resource form that the farmhouse structure was quite old?
I do not recall, and I'm not passing the buck. I just do not recall exactly how that language came to be.
Okay. Nevertheless, the resources have local historic significance beyond simply their age, correct?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the description of the farmhouse and the barn property, we looked at it and we knew we were looking at a very old site. We did not do any history with this project. The only history we did is when the township would give us that information.
Okay. So beyond it being quote unquote quite old, why was there a recommendation that it should continue as a Class 2 structure or Class 2 resource?
Well, if you look at the ordinance language, it's and per the AECOM report. Certainly, we knew the building. We thought at least did not qualify for the architectural criteria that we were using. Again, no history for Class 1. In other words, we did not think it could be on a national register. It certainly was already surveyed, and also as a Class 2, it represented sufficient historic significance as to warrant, in the judgment of the Historical Commission, the protections and incentives offered by this article. So what I'm saying there is that this was a joint effort that was done with the Historical Commission. They reviewed every recommendation and changed recommendations where they thought it was needed.
Okay. So originally inventoried and classified as Class 2 back in the 80s or 90s. By 2010, there's a recommendation to at least that it be retained as a Class 2 structure, not delisted, right?
Correct.
All right. And that brings us up to 2025, 2026. To your knowledge, has there been any application submitted to the township to remove either the farmhouse or the barn from the township's historic resource map?
Not prior to this application that I'm aware of.
Okay. Have you personally visited 1485 Valley Forge Road?
Yes.
When was that?
In January, I believe.
So just a couple months ago?
Yes.
Right.
During that cold snap, of course.
Right before the first session of this hearing, correct?
Correct.
All right. Would you relate for the board and for all of us gathered here your impressions of both the barn and the farmhouse within your areas of expertise based on that visit?
Well, I think it's obvious that this is a farmhouse or a tenant house and a barn together. I think that's how we saw it back in 2010, and in a developing or a suburban community, that's more rare with each passing day that both those resources are on the same property and they are both relatively intact. Again, I agree wholeheartedly with the AECOM report that together they or separately they could not be on a national register. They do not meet national register criteria. We saw the house. It was obvious where the historic, or at least to us when we did the survey, where the historic section was, which is Section A, and it looked to us like a pen plan type house, which is normally dating from the late 18th century into the early 19th century, which is where AECOM is pegging the construction date, roughly 1800 of this house. And on the inside, on the first floor, there was one diagonal or angled fireplace that's now removed, and a partition wall that we could see that separated those two rooms, which is consistent with the pen plan architecture. So we knew it was, just looking at it, we knew that it was quite an old property. There was the winding staircase, which was probably the most intact portion of that house, although I think one of those stairs was removed, I think, down to the basement. Regarding the barn, looked at that as an English Lake District type barn, and basically, if you can think of, and that timber framing holds the floor, and it also holds the roof above. In this particular case, some of the roof struts are tied into the end walls, the stone walls of the building, and but the primary support is through the vents. And then you have the basement or the lower floor, which is entered from the south, and that's where, as mentioned, where the animals would have been kept. There's two additions, as was discussed, one on the west end, which, as AECOM discussed, although it's a residence of some sort now or an apartment, it could have been an earlier structure. I don't know what the woodwork looks like inside there. So it's undetermined exactly what that was. And then you have the forebay on the south side of the building. That's the big frame structure where you're just looking out, sort of hanging off the barn. I agree. The woodwork with that section is mostly newer. So whether that was rebuilt, I'm not quite sure. As was discussed, as needs grew and the need for more hay or grains or whatever was needed, in Pennsylvania, southeast Pennsylvania, they would often build these forebays off the back of a barn.
Okay. Thank you for all that. And staying with the barn before we move to the house. You've heard the applicant's amendment of the application that they will retain the core portion of the barn, correct?
Yes.
And while we've been sitting here this evening, have you had an opportunity to look through what has been marked as Exhibit A18, sketch of the barn? Here you go.
Yes.
And photographs.
Yes.
You've had an opportunity to look through that?
Yes, I'll look through it real quickly.
All right. If the board is to impose a condition that the applicant retain the, strike that. If the applicant is to retain the historic core of the barn, do you agree with what is depicted on Exhibit A18 as to be retained, that is in fact the core historic portion of the barn.
Yes, I mean, the masonry structure of the barn is to be retained. The east or west end addition would be removed, and it looks like they are thinking of keeping the forebay.
Okay. Would it be your recommendation that the applicant, in performing the work, in planning for and ultimately performing the work that's contemplated by Exhibit A18, that the applicant return to and coordinate their activities with the Township Historical Commission?
Oh, absolutely.
And would that include working with either you or another consultant on behalf of the Township to ensure that the work is done in a manner which respects the historic core of the structure?
I think that would be the best way to handle this for everybody.
Okay. And would you also recommend a condition that the applicant utilize what I'll call period materials and craftsmanship when completing that work?
I think that would have to be, you'd have to judge that by what the needs are of the building. There may be, and what the use of the building is going to be. If it's going to be sitting here and not used, there may be ways to address it on a temporary basis, that if someday somebody wants to open up something in there and they want it to be restored, they could restore it at that time. I think, at least on the exterior, that would be an area where there need to be more expertise and craftsmanship. If I may, I did want to question, why the forebay would be kept in this case. I think it would be more expensive in the long run, and I also think it's less historic material, though I didn't inspect it very closely. And in the long run, it would just be more costly to operate that part of the building. And I think also, if you took it off, it would really demonstrate how an English Lake District barn looks.
Okay. But again, all of those are details that would be worked out in coordination with the Historical Commission and the applicant during the land development process, correct?
Correct.
Man,
You're at 9:04, and so
we're going to turn our attention to the farmhouse.
So now is probably a good natural point to break and switch if the board's agreeable, and we'll come back. Why don't we go off the record to talk schedules?